Hi, it's Penny here. Welcome to another reading vlog. This week, mostly, we're trying to enjoy a little bit of like normal life before we get back to house buying things. I don't know, last week we were holidaying and looking at a bunch of houses. Hopefully in a couple of weeks from now we might actually be able to buy one. Who knows? Everything's a mystery, but for now, normal life and maybe some reading. So I actually have a pile of kind of random things. How to frame this. I do have a couple of science fictions, and then I also have, I guess, another Western fantasy. I read some Western fantasies last week, or over the last few weeks since we were away. I read a couple last week. I've got one more that I wanted to read. I've got a couple of sci-fis, and then I've got a few graphic novel things, both physically and also on my iPad. So kind of lots of things on the go, and I don't know how that's going to work, but let's just talk through it one thing at a time. Firstly, I've got Game Changer by Neal Shusterman. This is a YA sci-fi about this football player. He gets banged on the head and then starts slipping into different multiverses. I have actually read, I think, the first 2 chapters, and already he has had an experience where he hit his head and then suddenly all the stop signs were blue, and he's like, that's weird, and everyone else is like, no, it's not. There's also kind of quite a lot in here suggesting that this is going to be this white football player kind of learning a lot about his privilege, but it hasn't really gotten into any of that yet, so I will keep going with that and see where it goes. I do like a nice multiverse story, and I have enjoyed the way it's dealing with that so far. As well, I have a couple of audiobooks. So one is that Western fantasy I was talking about, which is Fate of the Argosi. It might be a stretch to call it a Western fantasy, but Furious Parfax is kind of framed as a cowboy nomad type character with a bit of a Western accent in the audiobooks. So this is a spin-off series from the Spellslinger series by Sebastien de Castell, and in the spin-off we're following a character named Furious Parfax, who's kind of like a mentor type figure in the Spellslinger series, but in this one we're kind of getting her backstory and how she became the person she is, which is like this nomadic traveling philosopher. So the Argosi are these people, they have these tarot card type things that they create that they use to spread messages and maybe do some kind of magic with. Basically every book in the main series and this spin-off series so far has had like a new kind of magic system in every one, because they're always traveling around and meeting different cultures who do magic in different ways. So I've kind of forgotten exactly what happened in the first 2 books, but I'm hoping that I will really love this 3rd one, because I did love the rest, and I think it'll come back to me. Fingers crossed. Then as well, I have another audiobook. This one's a longer one. I'm worried I'm going to run out of time for it, but this is the last book in the Jarin series by Elliott. So this is a weird story. It's kind of a sci-fi romance, so like a sci-romance, I think we're calling it these days, where humans went out into space and we discovered there was already this empire out there and they tried to just absorb us. There was a rebellion, and now the leader of the rebellion, because of the way the culture of these aliens works, he's been put in quite a powerful position, but he's still kind of working on this rebellion. At the same time, his younger sister, who is his heir, has ended up on this planet where the people there don't know anything about the rest of the goings on in space, and she's kind of having a romance with the leader of this nomadic tribe who's trying to take over all the tribes. And throughout the series there's been a lot of different interactions between people of this nomadic tribe who are very primitive and have no idea about anything that's going on, and then people who've come from Earth and know everything about technology and the politics of the universe, and kind of having romances between them while also dealing with this rebellion. So there is kind of a focus on the technology and the politics and the cultures. Like Elliott really loves to explore culture, but a lot of it is done through more romance plot lines. I don't know. This is a series that I first read back in my 20s, a long time ago now, and then I've always wanted to continue it. Now I'm continuing it. I don't always love it, but it has been an interesting journey, so we'll see where the last book goes. And honestly, if I look like I'm melting, it's because I am. It's so hot at the moment. Then let's just talk briefly about the graphic novels that I'm reading. I do have from the library The Night Eaters by Takeda. So this is like, wow, this is actually Her Little Reapers, the second volume of the Night Eaters. So it's a graphic novel series about these twins and their parents come to help them out over COVID. I think their parents are from Hawaii, maybe originally from Korea. I've also forgotten the details of this one. But basically their parents decide that they're not hard enough and get them to help out with this haunted house that is across the road from them. So there's some horror elements and maybe some strange unknown things about their parents. I mainly picked this up because Majorie and Sana Takeda are the creators of Monstrous, which I love. I do think the art in this is not quite as good as Monstrous, but it is a similar style, and I'm really hoping the second volume is going to do something really interesting with the setup from the first volume. I'm not actually sure if this is like the end of the series or whether there's going to be more. No idea. That's often the case with graphic novel type things. I also have volume 5 of I Hate Fairyland, which is about this young girl who gets sucked through into Fairyland and then is meant to very quickly find the key and be able to leave, but she can't, and so she's stuck there for like 27 years and she gets very violent and angry about the whole situation. I think this 5th volume was recently released. The art is always really colourful and bright, which really contrasts with the violent nature of everything that's going on. So it's usually a lot of fun and I'm hoping I'll love this. And then as well, I have multiple volumes of The Promised Neverland on my iPad from the library. I think I have 11 to 14 and I maybe can get the next couple. So I would really like to like blast through that series really because it's a 20-book series and I kind of have regrets about having started it, but I am enjoying it, maybe. There's volumes that I've loved and volumes that I haven't loved so much, so I'll try and pick those up. I also have started reading The Cursed Princess Club based on a recommendation from my sister. I've just been reading it on my phone on Webtoon and I've been really loving it. I've been finding it really addictive. I don't know if it's just the scrolling nature of reading it on my phone or what it is. I don't really love the art style, but it's the story basically about these 3 princesses and their dad has arranged for them to marry the 3 princes of this neighboring kingdom. But while the first 2 princesses are kind of like beautiful, typical princesses, Gwendolyn, the 3rd princess, is not the typical beautiful princess. She sleeps with a possum. She has like green skin and kind of greenish hair, but like murky, yuck green, you know? And she ends up joining up with this Cursed Princess Club, even though it's never clear, or so far it isn't clear, whether Gwendolyn herself is cursed. And I don't know if I want her to be cursed or not. But basically, when the 3rd prince meets her, he's like, this is not what I signed up for. How come my brothers get these beautiful princesses? I'm kind of hoping that the final lesson will be, you know, that you shouldn't judge people by their looks. And that is the way that it's leaning. But just in general, it's really silly and really funny, while also kind of being a little bit dark, but also kind of wholesome. I don't know, I'm having a great time with it, so I'm going to keep reading that as well. Basically, I'm reading a bunch of different things. I don't know what I'm doing really, but I will update you when I have made some more progress. So I feel like I am reading too many things at once. I'm sure that this feeling is also coming from just being overwhelmed with like house offer nonsense stuff and like just life stuff that's going on. That's very annoying. And so maybe I should try and read less, but also that's probably not going to happen. Anyway, let me tell you about the books. I'm actually going to talk about them in order of like what I'm enjoying most to what I'm enjoying least. Because I think I'm actually feeling kind of meh about like at least half of the things I'm reading, which probably also isn't helping. But anyway, firstly, I am listening to the audiobook of The Fate of the Argosi. I think I'm about halfway through it. And that's what I'm really enjoying. If everything I was reading I was enjoying as much as that, we'd be doing a lot better. So this series, what I've found out that's happening, since I had forgotten about what was going on in the series, since it's been so long since I read the first 2 books. In this one, basically, the Argosi have these disharmony cards. So whenever they have someone help them out and then that causes the other person suffering, they'll create a disharmony card to kind of represent the debt that's owed. And Furious decides to pick one of her disharmony cards at random and try and do what she can to repay that debt, which leads her to go and try and save an old friend from a jail. Events happen that eventually leads to her and a couple of other people going to try and save these children. So what is interesting is in my last vlog I read Red Country by Joy Abercrombie, and that one they're also going on a trip to save children and there's a little bit of a western feel. So some similarities. But what I will say is, while Joe Abercrombie is really gritty and just that real grimdark feel, the Fate of the Argosi, it's still kind of gritty feeling, and there is a lot of darkness to what's going on, because like these children are the Mardek, who are of this race that the Jantep people have come in and basically taken over their country and killed most of them off. And now again, these children are on the run from the Jantep. So like, that's pretty dark, but it's also got kind of a nice sense of humor. But unlike Joe Abercrombie, who also can be quite humorous, but unlike Joe Abercrombie's stuff, there's still quite a lot of hope. And I really love the Argosi philosophy. It's got like these different arts that they practice, and I think that everything about the Argosi would be so amazing to be in the mainstream, to have people trying to live that philosophy. I wish this series would be like adapted into a TV show or something. And it's kind of sad to me that I think a lot of people won't pick this series up because it's a spin-off of the Spellslinger series, but I also think it's so much better than the Spellslinger series. Even though the tone is similar, I just think Furious Parfax is a much better main character and like less of a dumbass compared to Callan from the Spellslinger series. And kind of just because Furious Parfax is so ingrained in the Argosi philosophy, you get some really great lines and some really great wordplay as well. Like, I'm just enjoying that audiobook so much. Then the other thing that I'm enjoying is actually something I'm a bit surprised about, and that is the Cursed Princess Club. I think, let me check. I'm just honestly, whenever I have a moment where I don't know what I want to do, I'm picking up my phone and reading another episode of it. It's probably not the best, actually. It makes me quite distracted, and I think it takes me longer to read an episode than I realized. But maybe I am scrolling social media less as a result. I'm not sure if it's a good thing or not. So I'm on episode 71, which I think probably correlates to volume 3 of the books, but I couldn't find any information, so I'm kind of just making that up. Overall, I think there's like 170 episodes, 180 episodes, so I've still got quite a lot more to read. And I'm kind of happy about that because I'm enjoying spending time with these characters so much. There are just so many great lessons, and every character in here is hilarious. Like, there's so much humor to it, as well as, like, some of that humor is really stupid. Don't get me wrong. But it's just laugh out loud, and it's also really wholesome. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it also has some really serious messages about self-love and taking care of yourself and taking care of other people. Like, honestly, I am loving reading this so much. Even reading it on my phone, I'm just loving it. And I know I'm going to be really sad when I finish that and I don't just have it to swipe through on my phone anymore. Then as well, I did read volume 5 of I Hate Fairyland, and I had fun with this. I will say, like, it's nothing too deep. There's nothing too amazing in it, but the colors and the art are just so beautiful and vibrant. I love the way that the events are depicted, and like some of these scenes are so disgusting and gory, but also like really complex and detailed. There's so much going on in it, even though the plot is not that amazing. Basically, in this volume, we start out with Gert in the real world kind of sucking at living a normal life, and then something happens that means she has an opportunity to travel back to Fairyland. However, in this volume, she doesn't actually get to Fairyland. She spends most of the time traveling there and dealing with different dramas. And like, as I said, there's not that much depth to the plot, but it was a really fun time and I enjoyed it. It's just quite twisted in some parts, actually, but also kind of cute at the same time, and just I had a great time with this. And I have put a hold on volume 6 at my library. It just came out in January, so I don't know when my library is going to actually get it, but I'm glad to be back in this series for a little bit. Then as well, the actual book that I'm reading. Why am I reading so many things at once, honestly? This, I think I'm about a third of the way through. I will say, so far, the main character is just really boring. He's like this football star, and also in a multiverse he's currently in. He's super rich as well, so like super privileged. There has been some interesting things happening in the multiverses that he has traveled to, and actually the last line that I read last night before I fell asleep was a really good last line and hints at some of what's actually going on, and maybe maybe it's going to be cool. So I hope so. I do think some of the ways that it's handling the different themes, like there's quite a lot about racism, and I think there's also going to be some amount of like male privilege being dealt with. Like just, it's dealing with different kinds of privilege, and sometimes the way it's dealing with that is a bit heavy-handed, but I don't know, sometimes I feel like you have to be a bit more lenient with that in terms of YA books, because I remember, I don't want to be condescending, but I remember when I was a teenager, I was kind of a dumbass. Like I just didn't know about a lot of stuff, and so some things I just needed someone to tell me. And so I think YA books need to do that a bit more than adult books, because presumably by the time you get to being an adult, you don't need to be told things as much as you do when you're younger and you just don't know, you know? So overall, I'm still feeling kind of meh about it, but hopeful that it's going to get better. And like, it's not terrible, it's just like, okay, in the middle. Then as well, I've read multiple volumes of The Promised Neverland. I honestly don't know how many, but I've basically gotten to the end of the Goldie Pond arc. That section was very action heavy, and I felt like it was really hard to follow, and then it took quite a long time for that to end. Even when I thought it was ending, it took longer. In the volume I read last night, which was volume 12, there was also a weird time jump which I wasn't expecting, and I don't know how I feel about that, but right at the end there was kind of this new mythological puzzle introduced, which I think could be really cool. The only thing I will say is this series kind of leans into a similar feel to like Death Note, where there's a lot of logic going on, that the characters are always working through different problems, and I feel like it never quite pulls it off to the degree I would like. It often just feels like really repetitive, and like the logic they're doing doesn't necessarily seem completely sound. Whereas, you know, in Death Note, when they're describing what's happening, I'm totally following along and I'm totally on board with it most of the time. But still, we got kind of the beginning of a new part, so hopefully I'll like the direction it goes in next. I do have all the way through to book 16 come through from the library now. Book 17 has a massive 6-week hold on it, so I think we're only going to get up to 16, but that, if I'm going to try and read one every night, and then like, that will be really good progress on this series. So that's the plan. Okay, so I think that I've decided to throw my book on the floor, hang on. I think that I have decided that I'm going to DNF Game Changer. I am just so bored. I think I'm nearly halfway, but just, it's so slow and everything's so vague, like the stuff with the multiverses, what's actually going on. It is kind of interesting, but like the way that it actually works is really vague, and if this is what it's doing, I want more details to how it works. Like he's supposedly doing some kind of training about how to influence the multiverses that he's shifting to, but the training is just like nothing, vague nothingness. Then as well, there's a lot in here about different kinds of privilege, and I can see that the issues he's addressing, like they're all valid, important issues, but it really just feels like white male privilege 101. It's not really dealing with any of the issues in any depth. Like the whole story just feels like there's not enough depth to it for me. None of the characters really feel like they have any depth. And like it's frustrating because I like the general approach to dealing with these issues, but the main character is just so boring. And I did actually look up a plot summary of this, and I can just see like there's some interesting things happening, and if it was dealt with in some depth, I think it could be good, but I don't think it's going to be. So I think I'm just gonna put this aside, unfortunately. It's just not the book for me. Luckily, I only spent $2 on it, so we haven't wasted too much money. And I guess I'm conflicted because I have a bunch of like multiverse time travel books in a bit of a collection, and this would belong with that. But since I don't like it, I'll probably get rid of it, put it in a little library, and someone else will be excited to find it, and maybe they'll learn something, maybe they'll enjoy it. But for me, not so much. Which I just told Jace that I was not going to finish this one, and he's like, you kept me up while you were reading that the last 2 nights, and you're not even going to finish it? Oops. Anyway, since I'm putting that aside, I'm going to move on to the fourth Jaren book, The Law of Becoming. I do actually have the ebook on my phone as well as having the audiobook. So I think what I'll do is I'll try and put the Cursed Princess Club aside at the moment and instead have my scrolling on my phone be The Law of Becoming. And then once I finish off Fate of Argosi, I'll switch over to the audiobook of that as well. I think that's the plan. I haven't read any more of the Fate of the Argosi though, so no more updates on that. The only other thing I think that I have read since I talked to you yesterday... What is time? The only thing I've read is I did read volume 13 of The Promised Neverland, I think. Last time I talked to you, I'd read volume 12. Anyway, I feel like we're still trying to move on from this Goldie Pond arc, and it's very slow with the way that it's getting there. I still feel like that story arc is clinging to what's happening, and this promise of this more mythological puzzle element isn't really getting going. And I could tell with volume 13 that it is meant to kind of be a very emotional story, and there's one character really questioning their decision making and the impacts it's having on everyone else, and like just the utter lack of control that they have. And I kind of like, again, like with Game Changer, right? I like the idea of it, but I just wasn't feeling it. Was kind of bored. So, but we're still hinting of interesting things to come. So I'll read volume 14 tonight. At some point, I do still want to pick this up, but at least by DNFing this, I've got slightly less things on the go at the moment. Real estate things are still being very annoying. Real estate agents are way more useless than I thought they would be. Doing some very annoying things, making it like harder than it needs to be. Much, much harder than it needs to be. But we will keep pushing through. Hello. So I am still reading Far Too Many Things, but I do think I'm feeling less stressed now. I think that's probably actually though because we managed to get through all the legal shenanigans and now we're just waiting, and now everything's out of our control, so it's kind of less stressful in a way. Anyway, let me update you on my reading. Firstly, The Fate of the Argosi. I think I've only got a couple of hours left of the audiobook. Which is weird because I feel like I'm only about halfway through the story. And when I realized that I was nearly done, I felt very confused about it. And I'm now really doubting how it's going to have a satisfactory ending. And I'm fairly sure this is just a trilogy, that there's not going to turn out to be more books. Like I've seen it referenced as a trilogy somewhere that felt official. So, I don't really know. Generally, I am still enjoying it. Like, I really enjoy Furious's perspective and just the way it kind of talks through everything that's happening and how Furious engages with different people. But I will say, because this is about a story of a genocide happening to a group of people, given the current times, which this is a new release, so they released this knowing that there's just no way that you're not going to naturally be drawing parallels between this story and what's happening in Palestine. And so given that, basically we have this group of young teenagers from like the colonizing race, and they are feeling really shitty about everything that's going on, so they're trying to provide some kind of restitution. And when the solution that's being proposed was proposed, I personally felt very angry about it, and I was expecting the people to just say, no, that's bullshit. But they didn't. They've now gone along with it. And to me, it just feels very simplistic, like kind of a fairy tale solution where somehow everyone gets what they wanted, even though they're not really. So even though I'm really enjoying the story, I think just some bits, and especially in our current reality, make it somewhat frustrating. And like, even though it is dealing with the whole situation with a fair amount of complexity, it's just that in some ways I still feel like it's too simplistic. I mean, it is a waaaay story. Is that an excuse? Probably not. The other thing I have picked up is The Night Eaters. No, book 2 of The Night Eaters, called Her Little Reapers. Damn it, my memory card just filled up and my camera stopped filming, so who knows what I was saying. But in the first book of this, we have these two young twins trying to run this restaurant, and their parents come to help them out and then decide that they're not hard enough and get them to help out with this haunted house. Now, we've learned a lot about the parents, and there is kind of a supernatural thing going on. And in this, we're learning so much more about that supernatural thing, and it's so dark and twisted. There are parts, like certain pages, that are just nightmare fuel. I'm trying to find some that might not be spoilers. I mean, even just this doll is pretty awful. But we have some pretty horrible graphic murders on page. So like, yeah, it's like the really horrific bits in Monstrous. This has also got some really horrific stuff. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm about halfway through. I'm really interested to see how it will go. I'm also really liking how it's dealing with kind of these two generations and their different ways of dealing with this supernatural stuff. I wish I could tell you what it is, but it would be spoilers. I have also seen on Goodreads now there is a volume 3 listed, so I know there's probably going to be more, which at this point I'm really excited about. Then what else? I have also started reading The Law of Becoming just on my ebook on my phone. I think I've only read a few chapters, and so far really it's just going back to the characters. It is some point in the future compared to the third book, because now there are babies that didn't exist in that third book and they're like young adults, and it seems like the story's kind of going to be dealing with the next generation to some degree, even though they're still quite young. I think actually though the character that's most interesting me is there is this guy from this nomadic tribe who has now traveled to Earth and is experiencing all the technology of Earth and everything that's going on there. But to be honest, he kind of thinks it just seems all like a waste of time, and he's really frustrated that the Earth woman that he's staying with, like, isn't giving him much freedom because she doesn't feel like it's safe to do so. His perspective I'm really interested to get more of. But I haven't read much of that because I have still just been picking that up on my phone, and I still find myself picking up The Cursed Princess Club more than that. The Cursed Princess Club I'm really loving. The way that the plot lines are coming together, it's just so great. Like, it feels like so much of it must have been planned right from the start, which is amazing because often with serialized stuff it doesn't feel like that. So I guess that's the other thing I've been reading is The Promised Neverland, or more the other thing I haven't been reading because I just haven't felt like picking it up, and so I think maybe I just won't pick up any more of that until next week or something. Like, I've just had enough of it for now. I do have a Babysitter's Club graphic novel adaptation also on my iPad, so I might pick up that instead when I feel like reading something on my iPad. But honestly, I'm probably still reading far too many things. Hello. So I think we are at the end of this vlog, and I actually had to write myself a little note of all the things I read because I read way too many things this week, but I didn't finish everything, although I'm not really worried about that. Anyway, here's the list. Firstly, Fate of the Argosi. I did finish off listening to the audiobook of that, and I still felt like the ending wasn't entirely satisfactory. Like, there was kind of a big dramatic action-y magic-y scene and it was really interesting, but I also felt like it wasn't enough, and there's still so many like open threads at the end of it that it just seems weird that this would be the end of the trilogy. And I wonder if actually Sebastien de Castell would have written more in this world if the spin-off had been more popular. But maybe it's just not popular enough to go beyond a trilogy. But still, like, there's a big gap, or at least it feels like there's still a big gap between the end of this trilogy and when Farius finally meets up with Kellen in the Spellslinger series. So, like, do we get to know that story? And as well, I think what I talked about last time, like, I still don't feel like this whole thing with the Mardik people and their genocide by the Jantep, like, I still don't think that was explored thoroughly enough. There are some interesting ideas in there, but I guess what I'm saying is I wanted more. I also just would say that I don't feel like this particular book was like emotionally impactful as the first two books. The first two books I thought like some really tragic things were happening. I mean, I guess that's true of the third book too, but it just wasn't written in a way where our main character was as connected to the traumatic things that were happening. So I did like this book, I did like the series, but also I'm a little bit unsatisfied. Then, next on my list we have The Night Eaters. So I finished reading this and I really loved it. Honestly, some of the time I don't understand what's happening, but I feel like that makes sense because the twins also don't understand what's happening and they're trying to figure out things. But also now there is kind of this big storyline with this cult that's involved in the supernatural element, and both the parents and the twins are getting very involved in it, and it's just really dark and twisted, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about the different magic. And I don't know, it's so hard not to spoil, but I really enjoyed this. I think this puts Majorie and Sana Takeda into like favorite author status. Like, it's just, if you like dark twisted stuff and if you like monstrous but you want something set more in our real world and you don't mind a bit of like serial killer supernatural murder stuff, this is it. I really enjoyed this. Then as well on the list I have Law of Becoming. I haven't read any more of that and I think I'm just going to kind of put it aside for a little bit and like pick up the audiobook whenever it's convenient. I don't know when that will be because I've got too many other things to read. I also have the Cursed Princess Club, still reading it, still loving it. Like, it's just the most emotionally satisfying story and it just surprises me so much. Even though it's in some ways such a basic story and following so many tropes, at the same time it'll like come out of left field with a joke that just makes me laugh because it's so surprising and unexpected and it's just, I love it. Then we have The Promised Neverland. I did actually last night finish off volume 14. I will say something happened in volume 14 that I feel like we've been waiting for a long time, but the way it happened made me feel like there's been a whole plot going on separate from what we've been reading and that plot is the plot that I wanted to be reading. So in some ways I'm a little bit frustrated about it, even though like emotionally this thing that's happened is very satisfying. But why am I missing out on the actual interesting plot? So that's frustrating, but there was also kind of at the end of that volume like a moral dilemma introduced and I'll be interested to see where it goes with that. I still think like it's told in such a repetitive way and for the most part I don't really like the art style or the writing style, so I wouldn't say I'm loving this series, but there are some interesting ideas in there. Oh, then I also read Claudia and the Bad Joke, the graphic novel adaptation of the original Babysitter's Club book. Do I still have my my Babysitter's Club books are all boxed up. So I don't know if I said the Babysitter's Club was my favorite series when I was a kid, just a middle grade series about this group of babysitters and they learn a bunch of life lessons. In this one, Claudia babysits for this kid that's really obsessed with like pranking people and that leads to her breaking her leg. And like, these stories are never too complex, they're just basic lessons, they're middle grade stories. I will say like the artist or the graphic novel adapter of this one is a new artist from the previous books and I do think you could tell in some ways. I didn't feel like the art was still good, but I didn't feel like the composition was quite as good sometimes. But then on other pages I thought it was presented in a way that was very creative, so it was a little bit less consistent than maybe some of the other books, but I still had a lot of fun with it. These are just nostalgic reads for me, so glad to keep going with this. And then we had a couple from the start of the week. So I Hate Fairyland, really liked it. I have a hold on the 6th book at the library. I will keep waiting, but still just kind of fun, gory, graphic stuff. Then as well, Game Changer, unfortunately a DNF, but at least it's another book off my physical TBR pile. So that was my reading for the week. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books. I would love to talk with you about them, or let me know what you've been reading lately. And do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.